All right, in this video, I want to give you an overview of how to structure a long essay, your response to the long essay question. There is a handout in Canvas that goes along with this that puts everything I'm going to tell you into writing. You might want to have that out as a guide as we go through the slides. For this explanation, I'm going to use a sample prompt. The prompt says, evaluate the extent to which religion shaped New England society from 1620 to 1750. Of course, we begin a response to an essay prompt by thinking about what historical thinking skill or reasoning skill are we being asked to use. You'll recognize that this is a causation essay in which religion is the cause and the effect is what is happening in New England society. Of course, we're being asked to evaluate the extent to which, so that implies that certain things may have had a greater or lesser effect on shaping New England society, and somehow in our essay we want to express that. As you begin to write the essay, the way I'm going to present it to you is that you're going to break it into several paragraphs, and each paragraph is going to do something. Often, your first paragraph will be the contextualization paragraph, where you'll earn your contextualization point. Now, I'll start by letting you know that that may or may not be the case, and it all depends on how you're going to offer contextualization in the essay. Often, we provide context for the subject of the essay by discussing what was going on, what was developing before this time period. So we often say, well, let me place this historical event into context. And when we do that, we often talk about what had gone on before. If your contextualization is going to examine what happened before the time period, then it should come at the beginning of the essay. If instead you want to talk about what follows, what develops after the time period of the essay, then this paragraph probably will go at the end. However, another way to do contextualization is to talk about things that are developing during the time period of the essay that aren't directly related, but help us understand what's happening. If that's the case, that also could and probably should go at the beginning. So your first paragraph would be contextualization, whether it's discussing events before or during the subject of the essay. It would only go at the end if it's after. Okay, having said that, and assuming that we're going to start our essay with our contextualization, we want to make sure that the contextualization we're providing is relevant to the subject of the essay. So, if the subject matter is, I know ours is going to be the colonial period and religion in New England, we don't want to talk about some random events that, while they may have gone on before or during this time period, they really have nothing to do with our essay. There needs to be some connection between them. It's possible that you might even want to introduce this paragraph by using the word context or something to signal that this is contextualization. Now, never speak to your reader, and by that I mean you're not going to start this essay by saying, first, let me provide you some context. Okay, you don't address the reader as you. However, there are subtle ways to say this. Religion shaped the development of New England society, but this was in a broader context. And then you go on to explain your contextualization. Those little clues make it easier for the reader to know, okay, they're attempting to earn the contextualization point here. I'm on alert for that. Now let's see if you do it. I also want to make clear that contextualization can't be just a sentence or two. Generally, to earn points in the LEQ, you need to develop them well. And so as a rule of thumb, we're going to want our contextualization to be several sentences, perhaps 3, 4, or even 5 if they're short, that really develops whatever it is you're trying to help us understand about the subject of the essay. And then as the last bullet point says, it's helpful that your last sentence of this paragraph kind of acts as a transition to the next paragraph, which will be your thesis. So a sentence that kind of shows how this background, this contextualization, now relates to what you're going to say in response to the actual prompt. Again, remembering that our sample prompt is evaluate the extent to which religion shaped New England society from 1620 to 1750. This is a possibility for some contextualization that is during the same time period. So it's often hard, especially if your essay is colonial, to talk about what preceded it. Now, it's possible you could talk about what was going on in Europe before English settlers arrived in the early 1600s, but sometimes that's a tough one to provide contextualization before the time period. So if it's going to come at the beginning, it's probably going to be contextualization that's happening at the same time. So notice here the first sentence in blue is kind of that signal sentence. New England society developed in a broader context. Okay, it just lets the reader know, here comes some contextualization. The sentences in green are the actual contextualization sentences. This is where you would earn the point. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm telling the reader that while this essay is going to be about religion shaping New England society, I am aware that there are other regions of colonies and things are shaping their society too. So I'm kind of placing the topic of the essay, religion's influence in New England, in the context of how the other regions are forming. So it reads, from 1620 to 1750, England was establishing colonies all along the Atlantic coast. In the Chesapeake region, settlers came in search of gold, but quickly began making money from growing and exporting cash crops like tobacco. Notice right there that I'm giving some depth, some detail, showing that I know what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm not making vague references to the other regions. I'm showing an understanding of history. Continuing, in turn, this led to the development of labor systems relying on indentured servants and African slaves. Now, in the middle colonies, great ports led to a vast commercial trade economy. This and the rich and abundant farmlands here led to an increasingly diverse population, including many immigrants. So you can see that I'm talking about both of the other regions. I'm talking about what caused their societies to develop in a unique way, and I'm talking about what those societies looked like. None of this answers the question. None of this addresses the prompt, because the prompt's about religion and New England, but it provides contextualization for that by talking about what else is going on at the same time. The final sentence here in purple is that transition sentence to the thesis. So I end it by saying, thus, while for many English colonies, economics played a great role in shaping their societies, for New England, it was religion. So I'm kind of acknowledging that, I understand in the other colonies, economics was a shaper of their society, but now I'm letting the reader know, okay, now I'm about to get into what this essay prompt is all about. The next paragraph, assuming that I started with contextualization, will then be we might call it an introduction paragraph, but it's really going to be the thesis. That's the heart of this. So we will follow that first paragraph with a well-developed thesis, or if we're choosing to put contextualization at the end, then we're starting with our thesis. In a history essay, the thesis must respond to the question, and it must do so with a historically defensible claim or argument. In other words, we're not just regurgitating the question back to the reader, saying something very generic and insignificant. Our thesis must show that we know history, we have knowledge of the subject, we've thought about this. And as I often say, no student outside of this course, so I sometimes joke, if I just randomly pulled a kid out of the hallway and dragged him into our room, he or she shouldn't be able to come up with your thesis. They should have to have knowledge of history to have come up with that. When we say a well-developed thesis, what we mean is we don't want a simple thesis, and we've addressed that. We don't want to just regurgitate the question, saying something meaningless. It means that we want to kind of break this subject matter down. And as a rule of thumb, in a long essay, you want to break the thesis down or break the subject down into at least two parts, what I call subtopics. So take this question of religion and how it shaped New England society and kind of break that down into two ways that religion shaped New England society. Now, by that, I don't mean two pieces of evidence, two simple facts. We'll actually have hopefully two or three pieces of evidence that will support each of these ways or subtopics. A good trick here is to think about that SPICE germ acronym. And there is a handout on Canvas that guides you through this acronym. These are the different kind of categories of history, ways we can think about history. So the most common ones are the S, social elements, social dynamics, P, political, and E, economics. There are other categories you can use as well, but if you always remember social, political, and economic, those are often good subcategories, and they can help you develop subtopics. Now, those words are not subtopics themselves. You don't want to say religion helped shape New England society socially or politically. That also doesn't say anything. But maybe by politically, you're thinking about it led to the formation of certain laws. Or maybe when you think about socially, it led to the way families were structured. That's how we want to use SPICE germ to give us ideas for subtopics. Now, likewise, as we saw in the previous paragraph, we want to either start, or I recommend end, this thesis paragraph with a sentence that makes it clear that you're addressing the prompt here, that these two subtopic sentences are your thesis, and you kind of tie them together at the end with a very simple sentence that I think often should start with a word like thus or therefore. Now, this last sentence is not really a good thesis. It is a more generic response to the question, but it signals to the reader that if they didn't catch it, these previous two sentences, what we're calling subtopic sentences, were in fact your thesis. So as you look at this example, the first sentence in blue is the first subtopic sentence. It's part of my response to this question. So how did religion shape New England society in this period? Well, in much of New England, the Puritan religion influenced the formation of laws and determined the political rights of the citizens. Now notice that that is not evidence. I am not really saying anything specific. I'm not talking about any specific laws or what those political rights of the citizens are. But nevertheless, it's unlikely that a kid out of the hall would come up with this idea, okay? So this definitely tells the reader you know what you're talking about, and the reader should, from reading that sentence, say, okay, I can't wait to see how you're going to develop this later. And of course, each of our two subtopic sentences will be developed in what we call body paragraphs, one body paragraph for each. The second sentence in green is the other subtopic sentence. And it is helpful sometimes to use a transition word like furthermore or additionally, or maybe something like on the contrary if you're going in a different direction. But here I'm just adding another way. So I say, furthermore, the Puritan desire to create a city on a hill, an ideal Christian society, led to the persecution and or exclusion of nonconformists. So again, that's another way in which religion was shaping this society. Now in purple, I close with a very simple sentence that lets the reader know this was my thesis. Thus, religion, had a tremendous role in shaping New England society. If that were it, if that purple sentence were all I had as a thesis, it would be terrible. It wouldn't be saying anything historically significant. It's not really making a claim. It's really just regurgitating the prompt, throwing in the word tremendous. But by bringing closure after these two subtopic sentences, it puts a neat little bow on my thesis paragraph. Now we get to the first body paragraph. This will be our third paragraph of our essay if contextualization came first, or our second if contextualization will go last. Here is now where you're going to really do two things. You're going to first identify specific historical evidence that will support the claim you made in that thesis, in that subtopic sentence. So of course, this paragraph should probably begin with a simple reminder about what that subtopic sentence was. You can do a simpler version of your first subtopic sentence, and that'll introduce this paragraph. But then we want to begin to introduce our evidence. This will be done in what I like to call a two-step process. You're first going to describe the evidence. So tell us what happened. Tell the reader a little bit of history. And typically one sentence, maybe two at the most, is enough to do that. Then, after you've described the evidence, now you're going to offer analysis. Analysis is going to be 2 or maybe 3 sentences where you're going to show how or why this evidence you just described supports the claim you made. All right? So again, it's a two-step process. First, describe the evidence, and then explain how it supports your claim. And once you do that with one piece of evidence, you're then going to repeat that two-step process with another piece of evidence that again supports this first subtopic sentence. And if possible, maybe a third, okay? 2 or 3 pieces of evidence in support of each subtopic sentence is usually enough. Here's a little bit more about the analysis part of the two-step process. So analysis is key. Analysis is where the reader knows you don't just know what happened, you really understand history. So when you offer that analysis, the second step of the two-step process, remember what the historical reasoning skill is that the essay is based on. So if it's comparison and you're trying to show how things are similar, stay focused on that. In our essay, we're looking at cause and effect relationship. So we want to show how whatever this religious development is, that is our evidence, we're showing how it shaped New England society, or maybe to what extent, how much it shaped New England society. Here again is a slide that just kind of lays out this two-step process. The first step is to describe the evidence, tell what happened. The second step is the analysis, where we'll explain how or why. I point out to you here in those that second bullet point under analysis, don't tell the reader it supports your thesis. Show the reader, okay? A good sign of bad writing is when the writer says, see, this proves what I just said. You don't need to tell us that it does. Show us how it does. Here's an example. So my subtopic sentence, my part of my thesis claim, was that the Puritan desire to create a city on a hill led to the persecution and or exclusion of nonconformists. So I start off in blue describing my evidence. I tell what happened. And my evidence, as you can quickly see, is the Salem witch trials. So I start by saying, in the 1690s, a number of women and men in Salem, Massachusetts were accused of witchcraft. Despite the lack of any credible evidence, approximately 20 were found guilty and executed for their alleged crime. Okay? That simply describes what happened. I'm not yet showing how religion shaped New England society. I'm just telling you something that happened. But now in green is the analysis. Because of the Puritans' desire to create an ideal religious community, they were unwilling to risk the presence of witches, which they believed to be demonic, in their towns. The witch trials also point to the Puritans' views on gender roles. So again, religion is shaping society in yet another way. Women who did not conform to society's expectations were dealt with harshly, as were these witches. Now, I could develop this even further. I could go on with it, but I hope you see that here is where I'm showing that cause and effect relationship. Here's another example about Massachusetts' intolerance for religious dissenters that often got them kicked out. And I offer both Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson as evidence of this, and I explain how that developed. Our next paragraph then would be just like the last one. It would be our second body paragraph, where we'd now look at our other subtopic sentence and develop that with 2 or 3 pieces of evidence, which for each we would follow the 2-step process. First, describe the evidence, and then offer analysis or explanation of it. The next paragraph then will be our complex understanding. Remember from the rubric, you need to extend your essay by demonstrating that you have a complex understanding of the subject. The rubric gives us several ways we can do this. Often the easiest way is to do both similarity and difference in a comparison essay, or if it's a causation essay like this one, to offer multiple causes or causes and effects, or if it's a CCOT essay to talk about both continuity and change. By doing both and doing both well, we should earn this point. But there are other ways, and some essays lend themselves to these other ways. We could explain a relevant connection to another time period. We could show how what we see in this essay is also happening at another time or in another place in history. We could use a different category of analysis to address the question. So if the essay is about, as ours is, if the essay is about how religion shaped New England society, perhaps we could look at another factor that helped shape New England society as well. I'll give you a couple examples. I'll put this slide up, and if you would like to pause and read what's in here, you can. The second bullet provides you with some of the ways to structure an opening sentence for complex understanding, to kind of, again, signal to the reader, this is what I'm about to do. And those are helpful guides for phrasing your essay. Again, the goal is to help the reader see that you're earning the points you want to earn. So sentences like this can certainly help them do that. And again, the last bullet stresses that this cannot be a casual reference, not one sentence or two. It needs to be well developed. It needs to reflect the historical reasoning skill. It really should look like another body paragraph. It's just going in a different direction. Here's one example of how you might show multiple causes. So I would start this paragraph by saying, while religion was one cause of the way in which New England society developed, and of course you just wrote a lot about that, so was its climate and geography. And now I would continue to develop how those things shape New England society. If I want to connect this to another time period, I could say something like this. The way in which religion helped shape the development of colonial New England is similar to how religion, particularly the Second Great Awakening, affected American society in the mid-19th century. And then I could develop that. The last paragraph of our essay would be contextualization if we placed it at the end. If we did it at the beginning, our essay is done. But I do want to stress there is no need at all for a concluding paragraph. that idea that we have a conclusion that summarizes our thesis or summarizes our main points doesn't apply on an AP exam. There are no points earned for a conclusion, and if all you're saying is what you've already said in this fairly short essay, this is a waste of time. So the last paragraph of your essay will either be that complex understanding or your contextualization if it's at the end. Hopefully this was helpful and gave you some good ideas about how to structure your essay. Good luck.